I sat silently at the defendant's table in the courtroom, where the atmosphere was heavy, as if a thick fog enveloped everything. I am Jackson Sullivan, 36 years old, a businessman owning a small logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. My face was weary, my eyes sunken from prolonged sleepless nights. But my gaze remained alert with no trace of hope left for repairing this marriage. I had tried my best, but now everything was just a pile of ruins. My heart pounded, not out of fear, but because of the strange calmness that enveloped me, a calmness that even surprised me. Across from me was Addison Sullivan, my wife, or more accurately, the woman who was about to become my ex-wife. She appeared in a perfectly tailored black suit, her hair neatly tied up in a bun, exuding a calm and confident demeanor, looking as if she were walking into a business meeting rather than sitting in the trial that would end our marriage. Her eyes were cold, without a hint of emotion, as if this divorce was merely a straightforward transaction where she held all the winning cards. I looked at her, and memories of our early days in love flooded back. The warm smiles, the tight embraces. But now, all of that was just an illusion. She had changed, or perhaps I was the one who failed to recognize the truth sooner. Behind Addison were her parents, Maverick and Susan Miller, sitting in the gallery seats with resolute expressions as if victory was already securely in their daughter's hands. Maverick, a tall, elderly man with a silver beard, sat with his arms crossed over his chest, glaring at me with utter contempt. Susan, sitting beside him, pursed her lips tightly, occasionally whispering something into her husband's ear, surely words of scorn. They had always been like this from the day I married Addison. They treated me like a freeloader, even though I had poured blood, sweat, and tears into building my company from nothing. My heart ached when I thought of Emily and Lucas, our two young children. Where were they right now? With their grandmother, or waiting for an outcome they didn't fully understand. Addison's lawyer stood up, a middle-aged man with a decisive voice that concealed no ambition to seize everything. He began presenting the requests for asset division, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. I sat there, listening to every word, feeling as if each one was a knife stabbing into my chest. He said, "Your Honor, we request that full ownership of the marital home in Columbus be transferred to my client, Mrs. Addison Sullivan. The reason is that this house was gifted to the couple by Mr. Maverick and Mrs. Susan Miller as a wedding present, and it has belonged to Mrs. Addison's family from the beginning." I swallowed hard, memories of that house flooding back. It was a charming two-story home in the suburbs of Columbus with a lush green yard and a cozy living room. We had painted the walls together, hung pictures, and turned it into our warm nest. But now it was just an asset to be contested. I thought of Emily running around in the yard, Lucas crawling on the wooden floor, and my heart twisted in pain. How could I let it go? The lawyer continued, his voice growing sharper. "Next, we request that the 2 cars purchased during the marriage be transferred to Mrs. Addison for her use and registration. These vehicles are marital property, but Mrs. Addison is the primary user, and they are necessary for caring for the children." I smiled bitterly inside. The silver SUV I drove to work every day, and the small sedan Addison used to pick up and drop off the kids, they weren't just cars, they were memories. I remembered how excited Addison was when we first bought them, hugging me and saying, "We're building our future, Jack." Now that future was shattered, and she wanted to take everything. Then came the part that hurt me the most. We request that full custody of the minor children, Emily and Lucas, be awarded to Mrs. Addison. The reason is that Mr. Jackson is frequently occupied with work and does not have sufficient time to care for the children adequately. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my skin. Emily, my 8-year-old daughter with her golden hair and radiant smile. Lucas, my 5-year-old boy who always clung to my legs whenever I came home. They were my flesh and blood, the reason I stayed up late and woke up early to build the company. Busy with work? Yes, I was busy, but I had never missed their birthdays, never let them lack love. And Addison? She was busy with secret dates with that other man. I wanted to shout, but I stayed silent because I knew the real battle hadn't started yet. The lawyer didn't stop. In addition, we request that Mr. Jackson pay child support in the amount of $2,500 per month for the 2 children. $2,500. That was a large portion of my income, but I was willing to pay as long as my children were happy. But then came the fatal blow. We request the transfer of the entire logistics business operated by Mr. Jackson to Mrs. Addison, as the company received significant capital contributions from the wife's family. My company. It was my brainchild, the result of years rolling from a home garage to a large office. Capital from the wife's family. Yes, they contributed a portion, but I was the one who made it a reality. The sweat, the tears, the sleepless nights signing contracts, all about to belong to her. And it wasn't over. We request that Mrs. Addison be granted full control of the couple's joint bank account. That account held savings for the children's future, for the family trips we once dreamed of. Finally, all valuable items and investments acquired during the marriage shall belong to Mrs. Addison. Valuable items, the anniversary gifts, the watch I bought for our special day, the necklace she wore, everything. I felt as if I were being stripped bare, left with nothing but the clothes on my back. My lawyer, a middle-aged man named Tom, couldn't hide his anxiety. He kept glancing at me, his eyes pleading, "Fight back, Jackson, we can contest this." I saw beads of sweat on his forehead, his hands gripping the files tightly. Tom had advised me for hours that we had evidence, that I deserved to keep at least half. But I shook my head slightly, my voice calm. "No need, Tom. Just accept it all those conditions." My decision left Tom stunned. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Jackson, are you sure this is everything you've built?" I nodded, sitting straight, showing no hesitation on the outside. Inside, I was screaming, but I remembered my mother's words. "Trust me, son. This is the only way." The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier than ever. Those present, the court clerk, a few witnesses, even the judge, began looking at me as if I had completely collapsed. I could feel the pitying glances, the whispers. "Poor guy, he's lost everything." Addison smiled faintly, a victorious smile, believing she had won absolutely. Her eyes swept over me with contempt, as if I were just a failure, unworthy. My heart ached, but I didn't respond. From the gallery, Maverick and Susan let out comments loud enough for everyone to hear. "Finally, that guy has shown his true incompetent nature," Maverick said, his voice echoing. "Can't even hold on to his own assets. This trial is a fitting end for a failed husband." Susan sneered, adding, "We knew it from the start. He's just a parasite." Then Kevin Miller, my brother-in-law, let out a scornful laugh full of disdain. My brother-in-law relied entirely on his wife's family from beginning to end. Now that everything's being taken back, it's clear he has nothing of his own. Kevin, the 25-year-old who had always been jealous of me, sat there, his face flushed with glee. The mocking words surrounded me like arrows, piercing deep into my pride. I wanted to stand up and shout in their faces that I had done everything for the family, that the company was built by me, not thanks to them. But I remained silent, saying nothing more, no explanations, no reactions. I just sat there, staring straight at the judge. Addison delivered her final affirmation, her voice ringing clear. "From now on, everything has been returned to its rightful place. You're no longer on the same level as me, Jackson." Those words were like a final slash, severing any remaining threads. I felt an overwhelming loneliness, as if the whole world was against me. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern voice, read the decision. "The terms have been accepted. The trial is concluded." She banged the gavel, the sound echoing like a death knell for my marriage. Everyone began to stand, thinking it was over. Addison turned her back, smiling at her parents. Kevin clapped in celebration. But then, from the gallery seats behind, a voice spoke up. "Your Honor, I request permission to speak." It was Margaret Sullivan, my biological mother, a calm woman who rarely appeared in public. She stood up, her slender but steady figure, her silver hair neatly tied. Her appearance drew the entire courtroom's attention. The murmurs immediately ceased. I turned my head, my heart pounding. What was Mom doing? Addison and her family paused, their faces showing surprise mixed with disdain. The divorce trial that seemed to have ended was, in reality, just the starting point for a completely different turning point in my life. Mom stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute, and I knew the real storm was about to arrive. But before she could speak, a flood of memories suddenly pulled me back 3 months earlier. Like an old film reel running in reverse, dragging me into the whirlwind of days I thought I had long forgotten. It was a time when my life still revolved around my logistics work and my small family, with the naive belief that hard work and patience would hold happiness together. I didn't yet know that everything was quietly crumbling beneath my feet, and the real nightmare was only just beginning. 3 months ago, I was still Jackson Sullivan, a 36-year-old man busy with his logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. Every morning I woke up at 5 a.m., brewed strong black coffee, checked truck schedules and transportation contracts. The job wasn't easy. Delayed shipments, difficult clients, and constant financial pressure weighed heavily. But I loved it. It was something I had built with my own hands, from a cramped garage to a small office with over a dozen employees. I used to believe that as long as I worked hard enough and persevered, everything would be fine. That's why. When I returned home, I always tried to maintain our family routines like a near-sacred habit, something I refused to let slip away. No matter how exhausted I was after a long day, I still made sure to be there for dinner, sitting around the table with Addison, Emily, and Lucas. Emily, my 8-year-old daughter, would always chatter about school with sparkling eyes. Lucas, my 5-year-old boy, was mischievous, spilling sauce on the table and giggling loudly. Those moments were the reason I lived, the flame that warmed my weary heart. I clearly remember one typical evening exactly 3 months ago. I came home later than usual because of an urgent shipment from Cleveland. As I opened the door, the smell of grilled meat wafted from the kitchen. Emily squealed and ran into my arms, her golden hair tousled. I hugged her tightly, inhaling the milky scent of her hair. Lucas followed, holding the toy car I had bought him the week before. Addison was in the kitchen, her back turned, stirring a pot of soup. I walked over and lightly kissed her cheek. "How was your day? Were you tired staying home?" I was a bit late, but I was still looking forward to our family dinner, I asked, trying to bridge the distance that I had felt growing wider lately. She just nodded without turning around, her voice flat. "It was normal. I'm a little tired, nothing special to tell." Dinner passed in silence, filled only by the children's cheerful chatter. I talked about my workday, trying to inject some humor to lighten the mood, but Addison merely nodded indifferently, her eyes glued to her phone screen. At the time, I reassured myself that she was probably just tired. Everyone has days like that. But the truth was, Addison had become increasingly distant, quieter than ever before. In the past, she was a lively woman who laughed easily and planned weekend outings. Now our conversations revolved only around household matters and the kids, and even those were brief. She frequently compared our life to others, friends on Facebook, neighbors, or couples she saw on social media. "Look at them, vacationing in Europe while we're stuck in Ohio forever," she said once, her voice full of dissatisfaction. I tried to explain that we were building a foundation, that the company was growing, and soon we would have it all. But she just shook her head, her eyes gazing into the distance. Material demands began to appear more often, far exceeding the financial plan I was carefully building for our family. She wanted designer handbags, a new car, expensive yoga classes. "I need to live, not just exist," she said, and it felt like a punch to my chest. I worked myself to the bone to meet her wishes, but it never seemed enough. Then the unusual signs became unmistakable. Addison's phone was always kept private. The password changed without telling me. Before, we shared everything, but now she clutched it tightly, turning off the screen whenever I approached. Her schedule became erratic. Afternoon shopping trips that lasted until late evening. Secret phone calls on the balcony. Once I accidentally overheard her giggling on the phone, her voice sweet in a way she hadn't used with me in a long time. Her unexplained absences grew more frequent. "I'm meeting old college friends," she would say, but never gave details. I noticed strange perfume on her clothes, late-night messages she quickly deleted. My heart grew heavy, but I repeatedly convinced myself I was being overly suspicious. It's just work stress, I thought. Every marriage has tough times. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I told myself these small conflicts were normal, that I was seeing things more negatively than they were because I was tired. I didn't want to become the jealous husband who groundlessly destroyed his family, but then that fateful moment arrived, exploding all my illusions like a bomb. It was a scorching midday in downtown Columbus. I was handling business nearby, meeting a partner to sign an urgent transportation contract. My car was parked on a busy street, and while waiting at a red light, I happened to glance across the road. My heart stopped. Addison was there, dressed beautifully, arm in arm with a strange man. He was tall, wearing a sharp suit, saying something that made her throw her head back in laughter. They walked into a luxury hotel, its glass doors gleaming in the sun. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. All my previous suspicions instantly connected into an undeniable truth. The secret calls, the strange perfume, the coldness, everything had a reason. I sat in the car, breathing heavily, feeling as if the world was collapsing. I tried to cling to a fragile hope, but the image I had just witnessed was too clear to deceive myself. I wanted to rush out, to do something impulsive, but then the faces of my children flashed in my mind, holding me back. I suppressed it all. I drove back to the office, my mind in turmoil, trying to focus on work but my hands shaking too much to sign documents. That evening I returned home appearing normal, trying not to let the kids sense anything wrong. Dinner went as usual. Emily talked about her math test. Lucas spilled milk and laughed hysterically. I laughed along, but my smile was forced, my heart in agony. Addison sat across from me, still as cold as ever, but now I saw her differently. Once the kids were in their rooms and their laughter faded behind closed doors, I carefully confronted her. We sat in the living room, the warm yellow light doing nothing to thaw the icy atmosphere. "Addison, today I saw you in downtown," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart. "You were with another man, and the two of you went into a hotel together." She turned to look at me, her eyes direct, unflinching, without a trace of panic. No denial, no confusion that I had secretly hoped to see. "Yes, you didn't see wrong," Addison replied, her voice even and cold as if discussing something unrelated to her. "His name is Evan. We've been seeing each other and it's been going on for a few months." Her admission hit me like a brutal slap. Blood rushed to my head, my ears ringing, all surrounding sounds vanishing. "Why would you do this to me, Addison?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to steady it. "We have children, a family, a life I thought we were building together. Didn't you think about the kids at all?" Addison let out a short sigh, her eyes showing clear weariness. "You're always talking about family," she said. "But were you ever really there when I needed you? I live in this house, but I always feel like I'm alone." I took a step forward, trying to stay calm. "I've never abandoned you or the kids. I work to secure our future." "That's your future," Addison interrupted, her voice turning colder. "Not mine." Her words stunned me. "What about all these years?" I continued. "The times the kids were sick, the sleepless nights, the hardships we overcame together. Does none of that mean anything to you?" Addison turned away for a second, then looked back at me, her eyes harder. "Meaning isn't enough to keep someone," she said. "Evan makes me feel heard, cared for. He's there when I need him." I clenched my fists. "You call betraying your husband and your children being cared for?" Addison replied bluntly. "I don't think I'm wrong. I'm just choosing what makes me happier." The images of Emily and Lucas filled my mind. I lowered my voice, almost pleading. End this, Addison. We can still fix things. For the kids, for what we once had. Addison shot up from her chair, her face flushed. You have no right to demand or control my life, she snapped. I'm so tired of this life, of you, of days revolving around your work and your absence. She pointed at me, her voice growing sharper. With Evan, I feel cared for and alive with my emotions. Not like with you, always busy, always putting work first. The coldness in her eyes made her almost unrecognizable as the woman I once loved. The conversation quickly escalated into a tense confrontation. I tried to remind her of the years gone by, the silent sacrifices, the vows we made before family and God. But Addison admitted no fault, offered no apology, showed not a hint of regret. I want a divorce, Jackson, she said decisively. And I'll take everything, the house, the cars, your company, and custody of the kids. With your lifestyle, it'll be better for them to stay with me. Those words cut straight into my heart. What are you saying? The children are ours, not something to bargain with. Addison just gave a faint smile and turned to grab her bag. From now on, take care of your own life. The door slammed shut, the harsh sound echoing throughout the house. I stood frozen in the living room, once our warm home, now filled only with heavy silence. I sat down, buried my head in my hands, tears streaming uncontrollably. In the next room, Emily and Lucas slept soundly, completely unaware that their world had just begun to crack. For the first time, I understood clearly. My family was no longer on the brink. It had truly shattered in that moment. The resounding slam of the door as Addison left still echoed in my mind, like an explosion shattering every illusion of happiness I had desperately tried to hold on to. I sat there on the cold floor, hugging my knees, tears streaming down my cheeks uncontrollably. The house that had once been our warm home was now just an empty space filled with painful memories. I thought of Emily with her radiant smile every morning when she woke up, and Lucas, the little boy who always clung to my legs demanding bedtime stories. What would happen to them if they knew their mother was with another man? If they knew their parents were about to separate? My heart twisted in agony, the pain cutting like a knife, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to act, to find a way to salvage things, even if it was the slimmest hope. I quickly wiped away my tears, stood up, grabbed my car keys, and left the house. It was late at night in Columbus, Ohio. The streets were deserted, only the dim yellow streetlights casting glows on the wet pavement after the rain. I drove to my in-laws' house not far away, just about 20 minutes if there was no traffic. That fragile hope was all I had left. Perhaps Maverick and Susan would help. They were Emily and Lucas's grandparents. They loved the kids, and maybe they would persuade Addison to stop. I told myself this as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding like a war drum. Everything had happened so fast, from discovering the truth at midday to the fiery argument, and now I was rushing into a confrontation I had never imagined. The grand villa of my wife's family appeared under the moonlight, with its pristine white fence and meticulously trimmed garden. It was a large house in the suburbs, a symbol of the wealth Maverick had built through his real estate company. I parked in front of the gate, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. The chime echoed in the night, and I felt like a stranger even though I had been there hundreds of times. The door opened, and Susan appeared with a surprised expression, her silver hair tied up in a bun and wearing her familiar wool cardigan. "Jackson, why are you here alone at this hour? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice revealing a mix of worry and curiosity. Maverick appeared behind her, dressed in pajamas, holding a glass of red wine, his eyebrows raised as he spoke slowly. "Come inside. You look like you've just been through something terrible." I stepped into the spacious living room with its luxurious leather sofas and the crackling fireplace. Maverick and Susan had been chatting earlier, perhaps about work or weekend plans. Both seemed surprised to see me alone at this late hour, nearly 11 p.m. I sat down on the chair opposite them, my hands clenched, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you both. It's something important about Addison. They exchanged glances and nodded. Maverick poured me a glass of water. "Go ahead, son. What's so serious?" I began to tell them calmly but without hiding the pain. I recounted everything I had witnessed that day. From the moment I accidentally saw Addison arm in arm with a strange man entering a hotel downtown, to the intense argument that had just happened at home. I described it in detail, how she laughed with him, how they disappeared behind the glass doors. And then that evening when I confronted her, she openly admitted it. She said his name is Evan, and they've been involved for a few months now. I said, my voice trembling, tears welling up again. I didn't hide the deep hurt, admitting that the betrayal had nearly broken me, but I still tried to remain composed. I emphasized that my greatest concern was the children, Emily and Lucas. I don't want the kids to go through this. They're still so young, they need love from both parents. I hope you can talk to Addison and convince her to stop, for the children's sake and for the family. Please help me. At that moment, the atmosphere in the living room grew heavy. I looked into their eyes, hoping to see empathy, hoping they would stand up and call Addison immediately. But instead of listening and sharing my pain, Maverick quickly showed irritation. He crossed his arms, his face flushing red, and interrupted me. "You're exaggerating everything, Jackson. My daughter having an affair? Are you sure you didn't mistake what you saw? Or are you blaming my daughter for your own problems?" His voice boomed, full of doubt and protectiveness. I was stunned, my mouth agape, not expecting denial as their first reaction. I saw it clearly. She admitted it herself. "I'm not making this up." Susan's expression changed almost instantly. She pressed her lips together tightly, her eyes growing cold, looking at me as if I had just insulted her entire family. "Jackson, don't go throwing blame or making insinuations." Susan spoke up, her voice sharp and judgmental. "My daughter isn't the type to betray her marriage. If there's a problem in this marriage, the fault definitely lies with you." She crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze undisguised with contempt. "You're always buried in your company and work, neglecting your wife and children, ignoring Addison's feelings. She's told me many times that you've never truly cared about what she thinks, what she needs, or how she feels in this marriage." My chest tightened, my breathing becoming labored. My chest tightened, my breathing becoming labored. "I work to provide for the family," I said, trying to stay calm despite my racing heart. "I've never intended to neglect Addison or the kids. I've always thought I was striving for our future together." Susan let out a soft laugh, but there was no sympathy in it. "If that's what you call striving," she replied, "then clearly my daughter has suffered far too much. You haven't given her the life she deserves." Before I could say more, Maverick slammed his wine glass down on the table. The sharp sound of glass hitting wood echoed, making the room even tenser. "Who do you think you are, coming here and talking to us like this?" Maverick shouted, standing up abruptly. "The house you're living in was given by my family. Most of the capital for that logistics company of yours came from us." He pointed directly at me, his voice overpowering. "You relied on my family to get where you are, to have any standing, and now you're demanding that my daughter sacrifice even more?" I clenched my fists, my nails nearly digging into my skin. "I've never treated your help as an obligation," I replied, my voice lowering. "I've always been grateful and have tried to stand on my own 2 feet." "Whether you tried or not, the results speak for themselves," Maverick growled. "My daughter still doesn't have the life she wants, and that's the truth." Susan immediately chimed in, her voice cutting like a blade. "If Addison decides to divorce, it will be the absolutely right choice. She deserves a better man, more successful, someone who knows how to enjoy life." She stared straight at me, not hiding her coldness. "We'll support her all the way, even if this has to be settled in court. Don't expect to keep anything." Those words made me realize that all my efforts had been meaningless, severing the last thread of fragile hope I had. "I just hope you'll advise Addison to stop," I said slowly, my voice hoarse. "For the sake of my children, I'm willing to forgive. willing to work with her to mend things as long as this family still has a chance. Maverick sneered, his eyes full of mockery. "Let me be straight with you," he replied. "I never supported this marriage from the beginning, and what's happening now only proves I was right." He pointed at me. "You're not worthy of my daughter." I sat in silence, my hands trembling, humiliation surging through me. Years of effort, countless sleepless nights, all my striving for the family, dismissed in just a few short minutes. There was nothing left to hold on to. I stood up, my voice hoarse but clear. "I've understood your position. Thank you for being straightforward." No one tried to stop me. Susan turned away, shaking her head as if I were merely a failure. Maverick had already turned his back, picking up his wine glass again, not bothering to look at me once more. I stepped out of the villa. The door closed behind me, the harsh sound echoing into the cold night. In that moment, I clearly understood. I had never truly been part of this family. Outside, the night wind whipped coldly against my face, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I walked away, overwhelmed by humiliation and loneliness, realizing that from this moment on I truly had no place left in my wife's family. My legs felt heavy as if weighed down with lead, each step dragging like hauling a massive boulder. Maverick and Susan, the people I had once called my in-laws with full respect, were now nothing more than cold, contemptuous figures in my memory. They had chosen their daughter, chosen blind protection, and pushed me out of the family circle like an unwanted outsider. My heart pounded erratically, not from anger, but from the vast emptiness that was swallowing me whole. I climbed into the car, my hands trembling as I inserted the key and drove off without a clear destination. The streets of Columbus at night were deserted, lit only by the dim yellow glow of streetlights casting long shadows of myself on the pavement. What do I do now? I muttered to myself, tears streaming down my cheeks once more uncontrollably. Every door around me seemed firmly shut. Addison was gone. Her parents had turned their backs, and I was left as a 36-year-old man with 2 young children sleeping soundly at home, unaware that their world was about to collapse. I drove aimlessly, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind swirled with images. Addison laughing with that man, her shouts during our argument, and then Maverick's mocking words, "You've been living off my family." They stabbed at my heart like relentless knives. I thought of Emily and Lucas, my 2 children who were the only source of life for me right now. Emily with her golden hair and innocent questions. "Daddy, why is Mommy away so often?" Lucas, who loved hugging my legs tightly, begging for fairy tales before bed. What would happen to them if the family fell apart? If they had to choose between Mom and Dad? Fear surged through me, forcing me to pull over to the side of the road, gasping for breath in the dark cabin. At that moment, what I needed wasn't arguments or reasons to prove I was right. I was exhausted from pointless fights. I needed real comfort, sincere advice from the person who understood me best in the world. And then, amid the chaos, my mother's image appeared vividly. Margaret Sullivan, my mother, the woman who had raised me single-handedly after my father died in a car accident when I was just 10 years old. She was calm, strong, and always unconditionally on my side since childhood. I remembered my childhood days when I was bullied at school. She didn't scold me, but simply hugged me and said, "Oh, son, life has many challenges, but Mom is always here." She worked tirelessly at the grocery store to support my education, never complaining once. When I married Addison, she was overjoyed, but I knew she worried because my wife's family was wealthy and might look down on me. "Just live honorably, that's enough," she had said. Now in this dark night, she was my last refuge. I turned the car around and drove straight to my mother's house in the suburbs of Columbus, about 30 minutes away. The familiar road lined with oak trees felt endlessly long tonight. I carried with me exhaustion and unbroken wounds, my face gaunt, eyes red and swollen, clothes wrinkled after a hellish day. When I knocked, it was nearly midnight, but my mother opened the door immediately, as if she had been waiting. She wore her old wool cardigan, her silver hair neatly tied back, her kind face illuminated by the hallway light. Upon seeing her son, Margaret didn't bombard me with questions, didn't reproach me with, "Why are you here so late?" nor show surprise at my wretched appearance. She simply pulled me into a silent embrace, her arms warm and steady, just like in the old days. "Come inside, son, it's cold out there," she whispered, leading me in and closing the door against the chill. The familiar warmth of the small house, the lingering scent of toasted bread from the kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock, washed over me like a soothing stream. She guided me to the old sofa where I used to doze off after exhausting college days. She poured me a cup of hot tea and sat beside me, gently stroking my back. Without a single question, she simply waited for me to be ready. Her embrace gradually calmed me, restoring the sense of safety I had lost long ago, since the cracks first appeared in my marriage. I took a deep breath, the familiar licorice tea scent bringing back childhood memories, and then the tears flowed again. Once seated, I recounted everything that had happened, my voice trembling but uninterrupted. I started with discovering my wife's affair, the frozen moment downtown when I saw Addison arm in arm with that man entering the hotel. I saw it clearly, Mom. She was laughing with him, leaning her head on his shoulder. My heart stopped. Then I described the confrontation at home, how Addison openly admitted it without remorse, and how the argument exploded. She said I had no right to control her, that I was weak. Then she declared divorce and threatened to take everything, assets and custody of the kids. My voice choked as I recounted going to my in-laws, their initial surprise, then irritation, the blame, and finally the contempt. They called me a freeloader, said the house and company capital were theirs. They fully support Addison, Mom Helves. I begged them to talk to her, but they looked at me like a failure. I told her everything, hiding nothing of the pain, tears streaming down as I gripped the teacup so tightly the heat barely registered. Mom sat listening in silence, never interrupting, never judging, never blaming me for anything. She just nodded gently, her eyes full of love and patience. After I finished, she thought for a moment, stroking her own teacup, then spoke calmly. "Son, now tell me about the marital assets you two share." I was stunned, quickly wiping my tears, not understanding why she asked that now. "Why are you asking that? I'm in so much pain and that's what you say?" But she just smiled faintly and repeated, "Tell me the details, son." Surprised but compliant, I listed them one by one, my voice still shaky. The house gifted by my in-laws on our wedding day. The charming two-story home in the Columbus suburbs with its lush garden that we had painted and decorated together. It's worth about $500,000, but I've put in so much work repairing it. Then my logistics company, where the majority of initial capital came from my wife's family. They invested $200,000 at the start, but I was the one who turned it into a stable revenue-generating business. The company is now worth over $1 million, but they say the capital was theirs, so they have rights. I mentioned the joint savings account in both names, around $150,000 set aside for the children's future. We both contributed, but most came from my salary. And then all the valuable items and investments acquired during the marriage. The 2 cars, small stock portfolios, jewelry, even my watch collection. Everything is marital property, but Addison wants it all. I detailed it bitterly, expecting Mom to sympathize and urge me to fight. When she finished listening, Margaret calmly said, her voice even as if discussing the weather, "In the upcoming divorce trial, you should let your wife have all those assets." Her words exploded in my head like a bomb. I froze, mouth agape, utterly unable to comprehend why she would advise me to give up everything I had worked to build. "What are you saying, Mom? Give it all to Addison? How can I do that? The company is my blood and sweat. The house is where I've raised my kids. I can't accept it." In my mind then, I wanted to fight for at least some of what was mine. A portion of the company, custody, some savings. I couldn't bear being pushed out of the marriage empty-handed, stripped by Addison and her family. "I have to fight. The lawyer says I have a chance to keep half. Why are you telling me to let go?" I pressed on, my voice rising in confusion. "Explain it to me. Why give her everything? I'll lose it all, the kids, everything. But Margaret didn't explain in detail, just shook her head gently, her eyes full of trust. Son, I ask you to trust me and do as I say. Don't contest it. Accept everything they demand. She emphasized that some things that seem lost are actually the only way to hold on to what truly matters. Life isn't always won by holding tight, son. Sometimes letting go is the key. Her words were cryptic, leaving me even more bewildered. I sat there, mind reeling, trying to reason. But Mom, how will I live after? Start over at my age? And the kids? She just hugged me and whispered, "Trust me, Jackson. I've never harmed you." I left my mother's house filled with doubt and anxiety. The door closed behind me, but the heavy feeling clung tightly to my heart. On the drive home, I drove slower than usual, my mind tangled with endless repeating questions. Why had Mom advised me that way, and was she seeing something I hadn't yet realized? I suddenly recalled previous times she had given me advice, from choosing a career, building my business, to deciding to marry. Each time, even when I doubted or hesitated at first, she had always been right. Thinking of that, I realized Mom had never spoken without reason, and certainly never done anything to hurt me. That realization led me to decide to trust her one more time, even though I couldn't yet see the path ahead. That fragile trust was what made me decide to stake everything one last time, following Margaret's words despite not seeing the road forward. I returned home, lay beside Emily and Lucas as they slept, and whispered, "Daddy will do as Grandma says, kids." But that night, sleep didn't come, only intense apprehension about the dark future awaiting. I lay sleepless on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, my mind swirling with images. Addison laughing with that man, Maverick pointing at me mockingly, and then my mother's words, "Letting go is the key." Why had she advised that? I asked myself hundreds of times, my heart pounding like a war drum. The following days passed like hell. Addison avoided me, communicating only through her lawyer about the divorce proceedings. My lawyer, Tom, called and urged me to fight, but I shook my head. I'll accept giving up everything. He thought I was insane, but I trusted my mother. And then, the day of the trial arrived, like a prolonged nightmare. The stream of memories was abruptly interrupted as I was pulled back to reality by Margaret's familiar voice in the courtroom. I was sitting there at the defendant's table, my mind still drifting through those sleepless nights, when her voice rang out clearly and calmly. "Your Honor, I am Margaret Sullivan, the biological mother of the defendant, Jackson Sullivan." My heart skipped a beat as I whipped my head around. Mom was standing in the gallery, her slender but steady figure framed by her neatly tied silver hair under the cold fluorescent lights of the courtroom. She requested permission to speak, and the judge, after a moment of surprise, nodded in approval. The courtroom atmosphere, already heavy after the ruling, suddenly fell silent. Everyone, from the court clerk to the few witnesses, turned their heads, eyes wide open. Addison and her family paused mid-victory smile, their faces showing irritation mixed with curiosity. Kevin whispered something to Susan, but the murmurs quickly died down. I sat there, gripping the armrest tightly, feeling as if time had stopped. What was Mom going to do? She had never liked crowds, never interfered in my affairs like this. My heart raced chaotically, my breathing shallow with anticipation. The real storm was coming, and I wasn't ready. Margaret briefly introduced herself, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I am Margaret Sullivan, Jackson's mother. I request to say a few words before the trial concludes." She paused for a second, her eyes scanning the room, lingering on me with a gaze full of love and determination. Then she continued, her voice calm but firm. "Currently, I personally hold assets worth approximately $25 million, left to me by my husband before he passed away." Those words exploded like a bomb in the stifling air. I froze, my mouth agape, unable to believe my ears. $25 million? My father had died 26 years ago, and I had always thought our family only had the small house and a modest savings. She had never mentioned it, never boasted. The courtroom fell dead silent as if everyone was holding their breath. The judge raised an eyebrow, Lawyer Tom turned to me with wide eyes, and Addison smirked, though her smile seemed forced. My heart pounded, blood rushing to my head. What was this? A joke? Or was she exaggerating to protect me? Margaret clarified that according to the original plan, the entire asset portfolio would be transferred to me after her passing. That is my husband's will, she said, her voice even, as if recounting everyday matters. Everything from stocks, real estate to investments will belong to Jackson when I am gone. She paused, letting the words sink in. I sat there, my mind reeling. The original plan? I had never known about any will. My father died suddenly, and Mom had only said she would handle everything. Now it all emerged like a secret kept hidden for years. Why hadn't she told me sooner? I thought of the difficult years when I struggled to build the company, and she had quietly supported me, sending homemade bread or calling to check in. My heart ached with emotion, but also confusion. The courtroom remained silent, but I could sense the rising tension. Chairs shifting, faint whispers. Addison turned to Maverick, her face skeptical. Kevin shook his head, muttering something. I wanted to stand up and ask her right then, but my legs felt paralyzed. Then Mom delivered the most shocking part, her voice still calm but radiating strength. However, given the current circumstances, where my son has just agreed to relinquish everything to end this marriage, and immediately after this divorce is finalized, I will proactively transfer the entire asset portfolio to Jackson right away. Those words struck like lightning. The entire courtroom fell into silence for several seconds, a heavy silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. $25 million transferred to me immediately? I was stunned, barely able to react, my mouth dry, eyes fixed on Mom. For the first time, I understood the true reason behind her advice 3 months ago to give up all the assets. She wasn't crazy or weak. She had been planning, a plan I could never have imagined. Letting go to hold on to what truly matters. Her words echoed in my mind. Now I understood. By accepting total loss, I would receive manifold in return. My heart raced so fast it hurt my chest, feeling as if the world had turned upside down. Lawyer Tom gripped my hand under the table, whispering, "Did you know about this?" I shook my head, tears welling up. Was this salvation? Or just an illusion? After a few seconds of deadly silence, whispers and murmurs began spreading throughout the room. The judge lightly banged the gavel for order, but the buzzing rose like a disturbed beehive. People looked at my mother, then at me, their eyes full of curiosity and doubt. On the side of my wife's family, they burst into unrestrained laughter, the sound echoing harshly in the room. Addison covered her mouth, giggling. Maverick slapped his thigh as if hearing a hilarious joke. Susan shook her head with fake pity, and Kevin laughed hysterically without restraint. In their eyes, there wasn't a shred of doubt, only absolute contempt. To them, what my mother had just said was nothing more than a clumsy performance by a desperate mother who couldn't accept her son leaving the courtroom empty-handed. Maverick laughed loudly, his voice booming across the courtroom, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Where would $25 million come from? Does she think we're all that gullible? She must be daydreaming in her old age." Susan immediately chimed in, her voice shrill and mocking. "It's truly laughable. Just empty words and she expects people to believe? No documents, no proof, just pure fantasy." Kevin leaned toward me, his contemptuous smile plain. "Maybe your mom is trying to salvage some last bit of dignity for you," he said. "But it's too late, brother-in-law. You've lost everything and those words won't change a thing." The mocking words came one after another, cold and cruel, like knives cutting deeper into my sense of defeat. In their eyes, it was all just the delusions of old age, completely without legal value, unable to change the reality that I had just lost the case. Addison turned to look at me, her eyes gleaming with undisguised triumph. "How pathetic for you, Jackson," she said slowly. "Your mother is making a fool of herself right here in court. Their laughter rang out, spreading throughout the courtroom, turning the atmosphere chaotic and suffocating. I sat there, my face burning with shame mixed with anger. I wanted to jump up, to say something to defend Mom, but my throat tightened, unable to utter a word. My heart pounded, my limbs ice cold. They were mocking the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for me, but my mother, amid all those stares and jeers, stood unmoved. She didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't produce any documents to prove it. Her posture was straight, her expression extraordinarily calm. "I have said everything that needs to be said before the court," my mother declared, her voice low and resolute. No extra words, no tremor. That statement rang out amid the lingering laughter like an invisible boundary that suddenly quieted the room. The judge banged the gavel to adjourn the trial, but in that moment I knew every eye in the room was still fixed on my mother, the only one who didn't need to laugh or prove anything. Mom turned to me, subtly signaling for me to stand and leave the courtroom with her without waiting for any further reaction from my wife's family. I stood up instinctively, my legs still trembling, walking in a state of turmoil, dazed by what Mom had just announced, not yet grasping where my path ahead would turn. We walked down the aisle between the rows of seats, passing curious stares, scrutinizing and contemptuous glances. Each step felt heavy, as if the entire room was pressing down on my back. Behind us, Addison called out, her voice betraying a hint of unease. "Is she serious? Are you two just going to walk away like that?" My mother didn't turn back or respond. Maverick's loud laughter echoed behind us, full of mockery. "That's enough. The farce ends here. Go home, old lady." I gripped my mother's hand tightly. Her thin hand was unusually warm. Amid the storm raging in my heart, that warmth calmed me slightly. Though I didn't fully understand everything yet, I knew one thing clearly. Mom was leading me out of this place, and I was no longer alone. As the courtroom door closed behind us, I realized the divorce trial had officially ended. But the feeling inside me was far from closure. On the contrary, it was the moment I clearly recognized something. What I had just lost was merely the past, and before me a major turning point in my life had quietly begun to unfold. As the courtroom door closed behind us, I understood that the divorce trial had officially ended. But the feeling inside me was far from closure. On the contrary, it was the moment I clearly realized something. What I had just lost was merely the past, while before me a major turning point in my life had quietly begun to unfold. The mocking laughter of Addison and her family still echoed in my head, but as I stepped into the courthouse hallway holding my mother's hand, everything seemed lighter. The air outside was cool, with the chilly autumn wind of Columbus blowing through, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I looked at my mother, Margaret Sullivan, the petite but resilient woman, and my heart overflowed with gratitude mixed with confusion. She had stood up in court announcing that enormous asset portfolio, shocking the entire room. But at that time, in my mind, I still thought she might have exaggerated just to shut down Maverick and Susan's arrogance. A way to protect her son, to stop them from mocking me further. I didn't dare believe it was true. On the drive home, I drove slowly, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to sort through my chaotic thoughts. Mom sat in the passenger seat, silently gazing out the window, her demeanor as calm as ever. The familiar road from downtown to the suburbs, lined with trees turning golden and red, felt endlessly long today. My heart raced with excitement mixed with curiosity. Finally, I couldn't hold back and turned to her, my voice trembling. "Thank you, Mom. You stood up to protect me to the end. I never expected you to do that. But what you said in court, was it exaggerated just to silence them? I don't want you to have to lie for me." Those words came from the bottom of my heart, full of gratitude but also worry. I imagined my mother, the simple woman living in a small house on a modest pension, only trying to salvage my dignity. She had witnessed my collapse and perhaps wanted to teach Addison's family a lesson. Margaret just smiled kindly, the warm smile I had known since childhood, when she comforted me after failures at school. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling in the late afternoon sunlight. "Son, I didn't make up or exaggerate anything, Everything I said is the truth, neither more nor less. Her voice was calm, without a hint of hesitation, as if recounting a simple dinner. Her words left me stunned, my hands nearly slipping off the wheel. I pulled over to the side of the road, breathing heavily, and turned to look at her. "Are you serious, Mom? Where did the $25 million come from? Dad passed away 10 years ago, and I thought we only had the house and a little savings." My mother's calm response left me both relieved and bewildered. Relieved because I knew she wasn't lying, she had never done that. But bewildered because I still couldn't grasp the true scale of what she held. My father had been a small-time investor who died in a car accident, and Mom had never mentioned any will or vast assets. She had always lived simply, working at the grocery store until retirement, and taught me that happiness lies in simple things. Now everything was turned upside down. My heart pounded, anticipation building like a ticking time bomb. She said, gently patting my hand, "Let's go home, son, and I'll tell you everything." That night I returned to my temporary rented house, after Addison had kicked me out of our old home. Emily and Lucas were staying with their mother under the temporary schedule, and the empty rooms made me feel lonelier than ever. I lay awake, my mind swirling with Mom's words. If that $25 million was real, how would my life change? I imagined the investments, the real estate, all of it real. That anticipation kept sleep at bay, only flashes of images appearing. Addison's contemptuous smile, the judge's gavel, and then Mom's smile. The next morning, the phone rang, Mom calling, "Come over to the house, I have something to show you." Her voice was normal, but I sensed the seriousness. I drove there, my heart racing, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool weather. Mom's small house appeared, with its tidy garden and the familiar smell of toasted bread. She opened the door and led me to the living room, where a thick stack of files sat on the old wooden table. Margaret began handing over all the legal documents related to the asset portfolio she had mentioned. She sat down, her voice gentle. "This is the family trust your father set up many years ago when you were still young. He invested wisely, and I've managed it since he passed." I sat there, my hands trembling as I opened each page. I went through the documents one by one, long-term financial investment portfolios with figures that made my head spin. There were blue-chip stocks from major companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Berkshire Hathaway, stable investments that had grown over the years. Then government bonds, safe and steady, private equity funds in technology and real estate sectors. I turned to the rental real estate section, several small apartments in Columbus and nearby cities generating monthly income, and reserve cash accounts in reputable banks with accumulated interest. Everything was managed transparently, with financial reports from lawyers and investment advisors. The total value of the assets was clearly stated in the documents, approximately $25 million, completely legal and without any issues. I went from one surprise to another, my mouth agape, eyes wide. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I struggled with the company, with the marriage, and you kept it hidden." My voice trembled, tears streaming down. I realized that everything Mom had said in court was true, neither more nor less. She had kept it secret to protect me, to let me stand on my own, and now, when I needed it most, she handed it all over. Holding the final documents confirming my beneficiary rights, my father's signature, the clear will, I trembled with emotion. For the first time in months, I clearly felt protected and trusted absolutely. Not from Addison, not from her family, but from my mother, the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for me. I stood up and hugged her tightly in deep gratitude, tears soaking her shoulder. "Thank you, Mom. I'll use this wealth wisely, not betraying the expectations and trust you've placed in me. I promise." My voice choked, and she just stroked my back, whispering, "I know you'll do well." After all the transfer procedures were completed, with lawyers witnessing and documents signed, I felt reborn. I used a portion of the assets to establish my own company, choosing the familiar logistics field where I had years of experience. Not starting from zero, but with solid capital. I rented a small office in downtown Columbus and hired a few employees. Thanks to my accumulated personal reputation, along with the trust of old clients and partners, my new company quickly secured its first contracts, transportation agreements for local businesses, then expanding to neighboring states. I remember the day I signed the first contract, my hands shaking but my heart full of excitement. This is my achievement, I thought, and completely on my own. The company gradually gained a foothold in the market, revenue steadily increasing, and I learned to manage more wisely, from the costly lessons with Addison. I bought a fully equipped house in the suburbs not too far from the city center, with a spacious yard and cozy living room, enough to start a new life. A 2-story home painted cream white with a modern kitchen and bedrooms for the children when they visited. I invited Mom to live with me for easier care and support, creating a peaceful home after the stormy months. Mom moved in with me, bringing a few old but cherished items, the wall clock from Dad, the antique books she had kept for years. In just a short time, the once empty house became warm like a true home. Life gradually settled into a stable rhythm. Every morning I woke early to brew coffee for Mom before driving to the office, while she handled simple tasks at home. Cooking, tending the small garden, reading in the peaceful sunlight. In the evenings we gathered in rare tranquility, eating dinner together, reminiscing about old times, or just sitting silently by the fireplace. "How was the company today, son?" she would ask, and I would tell her, feeling like I was back in childhood. Those moments healed my wounds, making me forget the pain of the divorce. Over time, my company developed sustainably. From a few small contracts, we expanded, adding trucks, hiring more staff, even signing international partnerships. My name began to be mentioned as a promising entrepreneur in Columbus, not through luck or reliance on anyone, but through clear-headedness, discipline, and the expensive lessons from the past. I clearly remember the early days when the office was just a cramped rented room with 3 employees and I stayed up late planning shipments. Now, 4 years later, the company has dozens of trucks, branches in 2 neighboring states, and annual revenue reaching 8 figures. It wasn't just thanks to my mother's inheritance, though it was the foundation, but due to the sleepless nights weighing risks, the intense negotiations with partners, and above all, the lesson from my broken marriage. Never let emotions dictate business. I had learned to trust myself, to build credibility from nothing, and to turn failure into motivation. Mom was so proud. She often sat in the living room reading the newspaper and smiling when she saw my name in articles about successful young entrepreneurs in Ohio. Life with her and the children, Emily now 12 years old, Lucas 9, was peaceful. But I knew the past never truly stayed buried. And then, an event dragged it back in a way I never expected. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye, and I received an invitation to a major business conference at the Columbus Convention Center, an annual event gathering business leaders from everywhere, themed Building from Zero. I was invited as a featured delegate, an honor that 4 years earlier, when I left the courtroom empty-handed, I wouldn't have dared to dream of. I prepared meticulously, a sharp gray suit, neatly trimmed hair, and a concise speech about my journey. That morning, I woke up early, brewed coffee for Mom, then drove Emily and Lucas to school. They had been living with me full-time after I won custody 2 years ago. "Are you speaking at the conference today, Dad? That's awesome," Emily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. I hugged her. "I'll talk about how Dad and you kids overcame everything." Lucas chimed in, holding his toy car. "Don't forget to mention the trucks." I laughed, but inside I felt a slight nervousness, not from the speech, but from the sense that life was leading me to a new crossroads. I drove to the conference, my heart beating a bit faster, never expecting the past to crash in so suddenly. The event was held in a vast auditorium, brightly lit with hundreds of seats filled with entrepreneurs, investors, and reporters. The atmosphere was vibrant, buzzing with conversation and laughter. I sat in the VIP section, greeting a few familiar partners, but my mind stayed focused on the speech. When the MC announced my name, Next, we welcome Mr. Jackson Sullivan, founder of Sullivan Logistics, with a speech on discipline and recovery. I stood up and walked to the stage with a composed, steady demeanor. There was no trace left of the man who had once left the courtroom empty-handed, trembling, desperate, and full of doubt. Now I stood tall, shoulders broad, gaze sharp, feeling completely transformed. Applause rang out and I took the microphone, smiling in thanks. But then, as I glanced down at the audience, my heart tightened. In the middle rows, I spotted Maverick and Susan Addison with her new husband, Evan Miller, the very man who had been her lover years ago, sitting there, their faces showing clear shock and discomfort. Their eyes widened, almost unable to believe that the man on stage was the Jackson they had once mocked and belittled. Maverick, now with completely white hair, mouth agape, gripped the event program tightly. Susan beside him, her face pale, whispered something to Addison. Addison, my ex-wife, now dressed elegantly but with weary lines etched on her face, stared at me, her eyes flashing with astonishment mixed with envy. Evan stood next to her, tall but now seeming small, avoiding my gaze. My heart pounded, excitement surging like a wave. This was the confrontation after 4 years of silence. I took a deep breath, smiling faintly, my expression calm but radiating the confidence of someone who had risen through his own abilities. Without words, that smile conveyed a message. I've overcome it. What about you? I began my speech with maturity, my voice echoing in the hushed hall. Ladies and gentlemen, the journey of building a business is not always smooth. I once lost everything, my company, my home, even my faith in myself. But those losses taught me about discipline and credibility. I spoke about starting over from zero, the sleepless nights planning, building trust with partners without relying on anyone. The most valuable lesson I learned is, don't let failure define you. Let it refine you. My words quickly captured the audience's attention. Many nodded in agreement, applause erupting after each key point. An elderly entrepreneur in the front row clapped enthusiastically after the part about rising from the ashes. Reporters scribbled furiously, and the hall's energy grew electric. I felt it, the genuine admiration, not pity. But while the crowd below showed admiration and approval, my ex-wife's family stood frozen. Their expressions shifted from shock to discomfort and shame. Addison lowered her head. Evan clenched his fists. Maverick glared at me with bitter resentment. They didn't applaud, just stood like statues, and I knew this moment was piercing their pride deeply. After the speech came the networking session. I stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by partners and business acquaintances. Great speech, Jackson. I think we should collaborate to grow together. An investor from New York said, handing me his card. I'm impressed by your journey. Another female entrepreneur added, mentioning market expansion opportunities. I chatted briefly but openly, displaying the stature of someone firmly established without needing to show off. I smiled, shook hands. It all felt natural, as if I belonged here. My heart still raced with excitement, but it was positive. The thrill of real success. I glanced at Addison's family. They were still there, faces flushed, whispering among themselves. Maverick pointed toward me. Susan shook her head. Addison looked at Evan with worry. What were they discussing? I could guess. They were realizing that the man they once called incompetent was now in a far superior position. As I broke away from the crowd, intending to leave the event and return to Mom and the kids, my ex-in-laws unexpectedly approached. My heart tightened, a subtle wariness rising. Maverick stepped forward first, blocking my path. His tall frame was still imposing, but his back slightly hunched, his eyes lacking the old arrogance. He forced a familiar, polite smile, his tone superior but less harsh. Jackson, it's been a while, he said. You've changed a lot. After all, we were once family. Surely you still remember some old ties. I think we should sit down and discuss collaboration. Your company is doing very well and we have established networks and connections. His words flowed smoothly, but to me they were just calculations disguised as sentiment. Susan immediately added, her voice shrill. That's right, Jackson. You should know how to separate personal matters from business interests. turning down collaboration now would be unwise, you know. She looked at me with pleading eyes mixed with pressure, no longer showing the old contempt. Addison stood behind her parents, looking at me before adding in a softer but calculated tone. The past is closed, Jackson. Collaboration is the most civilized way for both sides to benefit and save face. We're all adults now. Evan hung back, not joining the conversation, but his gaze toward me revealed clear irritation and jealousy. He realized he was in an inferior position to the man he had once looked down on. The one who had taken my wife, now standing there flushed and tense. I wasn't surprised, nor did I respond immediately. I stood there looking at them and clearly saw the motive behind the offer. From recent financial news I followed closely, I knew their family company was in serious trouble. Mounting bank debts, lost major contracts due to poor management, and Kevin, Addison's brother, had squandered a large portion of their assets on reckless investments. They were desperate, and now they saw me as a lifeline. Before me was no longer the disdain of the past, but the scheming of people trying to cling to the success of someone they had once despised. My heart raced, but not from anger, from an unusual calmness. I had moved past that phase, the phase of wanting revenge or proof. Now I only pitied them. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. Thank you for the offer, but I decline. Not because of the past, but because I choose partners based on credibility and shared values. I wish you all the best. The refusal was firm, leaving no room for explanation or bargaining. I turned and walked away without looking back once. Behind me were angry and confused stares, the bitter whispers of my ex-in-laws as they realized they had lost the position they once used to dominate me. And for me, each step felt lighter, carrying the serenity of someone who had truly closed the past and had no reason to look back. The conference hall was still buzzing with applause and conversation, but for me, that moment was like turning a page in a book, leaving behind the shadows that had once caused me so much pain. I stepped outside, breathing in the crisp Columbus air, and called a taxi to head home. On the way, I thought of Mom, of Emily and Lucas waiting for me with a warm dinner. I'll be home a bit late today, but I have some good news to share with you and the kids, I texted Mom. A faint smile formed on my lips. For the first time in 4 years, I truly felt free. After that encounter at the business event, my ex-in-laws wouldn't leave me alone. Just a few days later, my phone rang with Maverick's number. I stared at the screen, my heart tightening slightly, but not from fear anymore, only a fleeting weariness. He called, his voice still carrying that familiar superior tone. Jackson, I think you should reconsider the collaboration. We're all adults. Don't let emotions dictate business. I listened but didn't let him finish, my voice calm. Thank you, but I decline this offer. There's nothing more to discuss. I hung up, leaving no room for negotiation. Then Susan called, her voice artificially sweet. Jackson, after all, we were once family. Addison thinks collaboration would be good for the grandkids. I shook my head, though she couldn't see. No, ma'am. The past is closed. I wish you well. Addison texted, her words soft. Can we talk a bit? For the kids. But I deleted the message without replying. Gradually, those calls and texts stopped, and the connection between us fell into complete silence. I felt relieved, as if the final burden had been lifted. No more mockery, no more scheming, just my life, with Mom and the kids. I returned to a peaceful life with Margaret, focusing on growing the company and spending time with the children during scheduled visits. We gathered around Mom, their grandmother, with dinners full of laughter. Mom cooked their favorite roast, and I shared stories from work. The company continued to grow. We signed major contracts with a national supermarket chain, hired more staff, and I began considering a branch in Chicago. Life was stable, but not always smooth. I still worried about the kids, especially when they were with Addison. How's Mom doing these days? Is she taking good care of you? I'd ask Emily after each visit. She would just give a forced smile and say nothing. But gradually I noticed something was wrong. In recent visits, I started seeing unusual behaviors in the children. Emily, my older daughter, had become quieter than ever. Before she was bubbly, chattering about school and friends, but now she sat silently, rarely smiling, often avoiding eye contact when I asked questions. Once I accidentally dropped a spoon in the kitchen, the metal clanging loudly on the floor. Emily jumped, her face turning pale, hands clutching her chest as if bracing for something. I immediately knelt to her level, softening my voice to reassure her. "Emily, what's wrong? Did the noise scare you?" I asked gently. She shook her head quickly, but her eyes avoided mine. Emily whispered, her voice noticeably smaller. "It's nothing, Dad, I just got startled." That answer didn't reassure me, especially when she turned away right after, as if afraid I'd press further. Lucas was different. The boy flinched at every loud noise, and when it was time to return to Addison's, he always clung to me desperately. His hands gripped my shirt tightly, trembling so much I could feel it. Lucas sobbed, his voice choking. "Dad, I don't want to go back there. I want to stay with you." I knelt down, hugging him close, gently patting his back. "I know," I said slowly. "But can you tell Dad what's making you so scared there?" Lucas didn't answer. He just shook his head, burying his face in my chest. There were times I noticed faint bruises on him, a mark on his arm, one on his thigh. Not obvious, but enough to twist my heart. I gently pulled his arm out, sitting beside him. I whispered, "Lucas, Dad sees the bruise on your arm. Can you tell me how this happened?" The boy lowered his head, staring at the floor. "I fell. It's nothing, Dad," he replied in a tiny voice. I lightly stroked the bruise, careful not to scare him. "If something happened, you have to tell Dad," I said slowly. "I'm here to protect you. You don't have to hide from me." Lucas didn't respond. He just shook his head slightly, still avoiding my eyes. Many evenings I sat with both kids, trying to create a relaxed atmosphere. I'd tell silly stories, joke around, then probe gently. "Was there anything fun at Mom's house today?" I'd say, keeping my voice natural. "How's it been at Mom's lately? Any times you felt comfortable or had fun playing?" Emily pressed her lips together. Lucas looked down. Neither answered. Their eyes looked at me pleadingly, but their mouths stayed shut as if bound by invisible fear. Those moments weighed heavily on my heart. I lay awake many nights, a growing unease gnawing at me. My mind echoed the lawyer's old warning, watch closely because Addison might be unstable. Only then did I begin to realize something was truly wrong. And perhaps the truth was far worse than I dared imagine. Then came the fateful moment, exploding all my worries like a bomb. One late afternoon, as I was leaving the office to head home, my phone suddenly rang. I was driving on the highway, dusk falling, streetlights flickering on. An unknown number, but I answered on instinct. On the other end was Emily's trembling, urgent voice. "Dad, help! Uncle Evan is really angry. I'm so scared, Dad." Her voice was panicked, mixed with sobs, then abruptly cut off. The beep echoed and my heart stopped. I froze for a second, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. A terrible premonition hit like a tidal wave, Emily calling from Addison's house, her voice full of terror. I floored the gas, racing straight to Addison's suburban home. The car sped along, running red lights, horns blaring behind me, but I didn't care. My heart pounded, cold sweat breaking out, my mind reeling with horrific images. Evan, that hot-tempered man. What was he doing to my child? Was Emily okay? Where was Lucas? The 20-minute drive became hell. I called back dozens of times, but no one answered. "Please let nothing happen to my kids," I whispered, tears streaming. As soon as I arrived, I screeched to a halt in front of the door and burst inside without knocking. The door was unlocked, and the scene before me made my blood boil. Evan was yelling, berating Lucas with harsh words. "Shut your mouth, you brat. I'm teaching you to behave." The boy cowered in the corner of the living room, face pale, hands over his head, sobbing. Addison stood right beside him, her face indifferently cold, one hand holding Emily back firmly, preventing her from rushing forward, as if this was just normal household discipline. Emily turned to me, eyes red and swollen, lips trembling as she desperately called my name, but she was held so tightly she couldn't move. In that instant, everything inside me exploded. I charged forward, shoving Evan hard away from Lucas. The pent-up strength surged violently, making him stumble and crash to the floor. I didn't spare another second, immediately kneeling to pull Lucas into my arms. The boy clung to me like a drowning person to a lifeline, his whole body shaking, bursting into sobs. Hearing his cries, my heart felt crushed. I looked up sharply, my eyes blazing with uncontainable rage, staring straight at Addison. "What have you done to my kids?" I growled, each word choked with anger. My sudden appearance stunned them both for a few seconds. Evan scrambled up, face flushed with pain and fury. Addison released Emily, stepping back instinctively. I didn't miss the moment. I yanked Emily to my side, pulling her close, one arm shielding her behind me, the other holding Lucas, protecting them both like a wild animal guarding its young. "Explain yourselves," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "Why are my kids in this state of panic? Why are they trembling and terrified in what I once thought was a safe home for them?" My heart pounded like war drums, my hands shaking from rage pushed to the limit. Evan roared, his anger erupting from being shoved. "How dare you barge into my house?" he yelled. "I was just disciplining the kid. He's disobedient, doesn't listen to adults, so I scolded him. What's violent about that?" He stood tall, voice challenging, but his eyes kept dodging mine when I stared directly. Addison turned pale but stepped in front of Evan, her voice trembling but trying to sound firm. "Jack, calm down," she said quickly. "You're overreacting. This is just a misunderstanding in parenting. Evan has never harmed the kids. Don't accuse us like that." I let out a short, bitter laugh, devoid of any humor. "Misunderstanding?" I said slowly, each word suppressed by the boiling anger in my chest. "Then explain to me why my kids are so scared they can barely breathe, why they cling to me begging to leave." Emily gripped my shirt tightly, her voice shaking, barely audible. "Dad, every time he yells, I'm so scared. I don't dare cry or speak." Evan behind Addison frowned in irritation, his voice sharp and impatient. "I told you I was just being strict. Kids will spoil without discipline. Why are you blowing it out of proportion?" I whipped around to him, my eyes turning ice cold. "You call making a child too afraid to cry strict?" I growled. "You have no right to discipline my kids, let alone make them live in fear in this house." Lucas in my arms shrank back, his voice breaking with choked sobs. "I don't want to stay here anymore. I'm scared every time he yells." Addison shook her head repeatedly, her voice faltering but clinging to her fragile excuses. "Jack, you're letting emotions control everything. Think about it. How could I let anyone harm my own children?" I looked down at the two kids clinging to me, then up at Addison. "My kids don't know how to lie," I said, my voice low and resolute. "And I trust the fear in their eyes more than any of your excuses." Those words came out haltingly, forced, like a prepared script that couldn't convince. I looked at them, and in that moment I knew one thing clearly. Arguing now was pointless. I took a deep breath, my voice dropping but icy with finality. "I'm taking the kids now," I said. "They're not staying here another second." I held Emily's hand tightly, scooped Lucas up, and turned straight for the door. "You have no right!" Evan roared, lunging to block me, but I shoved him aside. Addison burst into tears, her panicked voice rising behind. "Jack, stop! You can't take the kids!" I didn't stop. I rushed to the car, opened the door, placed both kids in the back seat, and locked it. Emily and Lucas's cries mixed in the confined space. I started the engine, floored it, and sped away, leaving behind the house where my children had been turned into kids living in fear. In that moment, I knew clearly, if I'd been a second later, I might have lost them forever. In the days that followed, I quietly gathered information, not letting emotions take over. I called old acquaintances, Addison's former friends, neighbors around her house, asking indirectly, "How are my kids? Do you know anything?" One neighbor hesitated. "I see them crying a lot and Evan yells often." Then school records. Emily's teacher said she missed school frequently and showed signs of stress. Medical notes. Lucas's bruises were documented at the clinic, but Addison explained them as falls while playing. I discovered Addison often neglected the kids, leaving care to babysitters or letting them fend for themselves while she focused on work and her new life. Evan had a history of anger. Police records showed prior domestic violence accusations in a previous relationship, frequent yelling, and signs of abuse toward children. The pieces formed a horrifying picture. My kids were being abused. My heart ached like it was being cut. Nights I held them and cried, "Dad, sorry for not realizing sooner." Recognizing the severity, I filed in court, officially suing for full custody and requesting legal intervention to protect the children. For me, this was a battle I had to win to reclaim safety and justice for my kids. I hired the best lawyer, gathered evidence, and prepared for trial. My heart pounding with nerves but full of determination. In the days that followed, the custody dispute trial was quickly reopened. This time I appeared as the proactive father initiating the lawsuit, no longer the passive defendant who had accepted everything 4 years earlier. The familiar courtroom in downtown Columbus, with its old wooden benches and the musty smell of paperwork, was more tense than ever. I sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a sharp black suit, gripping the files tightly, armed with a clear and consistent system of evidence. Lisa, my lawyer, stood beside me, her voice echoing as she presented, "Your Honor, we have evidence proving that the living environment at Mrs. Addison Sullivan's home is unsafe for the children." I submitted school records. Emily's teacher reported frequent absences, lack of focus, and signs of anxiety. "Emily often flinches at loud noises," the report stated. Neighbor testimonies. An elderly woman living next to Addison's house said, "I often hear yelling coming from Addison's house, and the kids cry a lot." Medical reports from the pediatrician. Bruises on Lucas were documented along with signs of psychological trauma, anxiety, and insomnia. And evidence of neglect. Addison frequently left the children alone or with strangers, while Evan, with a history of violence from a previous relationship, was the source of their fear. I sat there, heart pounding, watching Addison and Evan at the opposite table. Addison's face was pale, her eyes evasive. Evan glared at me with hostility. "They'll deny it," I thought, sweat beading on my forehead. Faced with such concrete evidence, Addison and Evan had no room for fabrication. Their lawyer tried to argue, "This is just a misunderstanding. Mrs. Addison is a devoted mother." But their previous denials quickly revealed inconsistencies and lack of coherence. Addison testified, "I didn't neglect them, I was just busy with work." But school reports showed Emily had 10 unexcused absences in 1 month. Evan shouted during the session, "I was just disciplining them, not abusing." But medical records and neighbor statements completely refuted that. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern voice, raised an eyebrow. "You need to explain more clearly." The courtroom atmosphere grew suffocating, whispers rising from the gallery. My mother sat behind me, gripping her hands tightly, her eyes full of worry but resolute. I looked at her and drew more strength. My heart pounded, nerves making my limbs ice cold. "Will the court believe my testimony and evidence?" I wondered, swallowing hard. Lisa whispered, "Stay calm, we're ahead." But every passing second was torture because I knew if I lost, my children would return to that hell. When permitted by the judge, Emily and Lucas took the stand to describe what they had experienced. It was a moment that stopped my heart. Emily, my 12-year-old daughter, stepped up to the witness stand looking small, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm really scared of Uncle Evan. He often yells at me and Lucas, calling us bad kids. Once he hit Lucas because he spilled orange juice on the floor." She recounted the fear, the daily yelling, and the feeling of not being protected in their own mother's home. "Mom didn't stop him. She just watched," Emily cried, tears streaming down. Lucas followed, the 9-year-old, holding my hand tightly before going up, his innocent voice full of pain. "I don't want to go back to Mom's house anymore. Uncle Evan is mean, he hurts me. I want to live with Dad and Grandma. Both expressed their desire to live with me where they felt safe and heard. The children's accounts made the courtroom atmosphere heavy. Sobs echoed from the gallery, and even the judge pressed his lips together. At the same time, it clearly confirmed what I had feared all along. My children were being abused, and I had to save them. I sat there, tears rolling down, gripping the armrest. My dear son and daughter. I thought, my heart aching as if cut. Addison lowered her head. Evan shook his head in denial, but a child's words were the most powerful evidence. After reviewing all the files and testimonies, the court issued its ruling. Those waiting seconds were hell. My heart felt like it would burst, sweat soaking my shirt. The judge read slowly. After consideration, the court awards primary custody to Mr. Jackson Sullivan. I exhaled in relief, tears welling up. Addison was granted only supervised visitation and was required to participate in a parenting capacity evaluation and intervention program, a course on child rearing. Evan was prohibited from direct contact with the two children due to threatening behavior and emotional abuse. He was not allowed near Emily and Lucas without court supervision. Records related to Evan's conduct were forwarded to Child Protective Services and relevant authorities for separate handling, potentially leading to criminal charges. That ruling closed a tense chapter and opened a new one for the three of us. Light applause rose from the gallery. My mother stood and hugged me, crying, "Son, we won." In the time that followed, I brought the children to live with me and Mom, forming a simple but protective three-generation home. The house in the Columbus suburbs, with its lush green yard and cozy living room, now became a true family nest. Emily had her own room with a drawing desk. Lucas had a corner for his toy trucks. In a stable and safe environment, Emily gradually opened up. She started smiling more, sharing school stories, and her radiant smile returned. "Today I drew a picture for Grandma," she exclaimed one afternoon, showing me a vibrant, colorful drawing. Lucas no longer flinched at loud noises. He ran around carefree, playing with Grandma in the garden, his laughter echoing. I spent more time with the kids, making up for the voids they had endured. We went to the park on weekends, read books before bed, and I listened to all their thoughts. "Dad, I was so scared of Uncle Evan," Emily confessed once, and I hugged her, crying, "I'm sorry. From now on, Dad will protect you forever." My mother found new joy in caring for and playing with her grandchildren. She seemed younger, waking early to cook breakfast, playing games with Lucas in the afternoon, telling fairy tales to Emily at night. The children's affection made her smile constantly. "Grandma loves you two more than anything in the world." Quiet dinners, roast meat, salad, and homemade bread became sacred moments. We sat around the table, sharing the day's stories, small laughs gradually replacing the previous months of tension. Evenings gathered by the fireplace, watching movies or playing board games, filled the house with warmth. For me, it wasn't just victory in a courtroom. It was reclaiming the most important thing, a true home for my children. I watched Emily and Lucas sleep soundly, thinking of the long journey, from divorce, losing everything, rising again, to now having a complete family. My heart was at peace, yet full of gratitude toward Mom and determination to live better. This new life was the reward, and I would cherish every second. Those nights after the court's ruling, I often sat by the living room window, gazing out at the dark garden under the moonlight, letting memories flood back like a slow-motion film. Emily curled up under the blanket, her golden hair splayed across the pillow, while Lucas buried his face in his teddy bear, mumbling something in his sleep. They slept soundly, no longer plagued by nightmares of yelling or faint bruises. I gently stroked their hair, my heart aching as I recalled the days they cowered in fear. Those moments made me realize that victory wasn't about defeating someone else, but about rebuilding from the ashes. But at the time, I didn't know my journey wasn't over. There were still echoes from the past and final lessons waiting for me to learn. My life gradually settled into a peaceful rhythm, like a calm river after a storm. No more tense calls from Addison or her lawyer, No more prolonged trials with suffocating atmospheres and contemptuous glances. Just the steady pace of work, family, and quiet evenings. Early mornings I woke at dawn, brewing strong black coffee in the kitchen, listening to birdsong from the garden. Mom was already up preparing breakfast, toasted bread with homemade jam, fried eggs for Lucas, and fruit smoothies for Emily. We ate together, laughter echoing in our cozy home, a simple meal but filled with love. Afterward, I drove the kids to school, kissing them goodbye at the gate before heading to the office. Work was busy, meetings with partners, checking truck schedules, signing new contracts. But unlike before, I no longer worked myself to exhaustion. I had learned balance, knowing true success was at home with Mom and the kids. Evenings were the most sacred time. I came home early. Mom had cooked dinner, roast meat with vegetables, Lucas's favorite. We sat around the table, sharing the day's stories, no phones or work interrupting. Emily talked about her math test. Lucas showed off his classroom drawing, and Mom smiled kindly. Those quiet evenings erased all fatigue, the children's small laughs replacing the previous months of tension. On weekends, we went on outings to the nearby park where Emily painted under the trees. Lucas ran chasing a ball, and Mom sat on a bench reading. Watching that scene filled my heart with peace, though sometimes memories of Addison flickered by, not with anger, but a vague regret. This new life wasn't perfectly rosy. There were nights Emily cried, missing her mom. Lucas asked, "Why doesn't Mom visit us?" And I had to explain gently, comforting them. But we overcame it day by day with love and protection from my mother. She was the pillar, caring for her grandchildren with endless joy, teaching Emily to cook, playing chess with Lucas, and she seemed rejuvenated, her laughter filling the house. Sometime later, news about Addison's family reached me, not through malicious gossip, but through financial articles and messages from mutual friends. I heard that Addison's marriage had crumbled again, this time not due to an outsider, but because of the controlling, violent, and deceptive relationship she had chosen. Evan, the man who had once been her lover, now her husband, had revealed his true nature. He controlled everything in Addison's life, from finances to friends, and violent arguments became increasingly frequent. I learned from a local article, businessman Evan Miller accused of domestic violence, leading to swift divorce. Evan left in scandal, saddled with massive debts from failed investments and legal troubles. He was sued for fraud, and police investigated old accusations from previous relationships. The marriage collapsed after just 2 years. Addison was left alone bearing the debts and had to sell the house to pay them off. I sat in my office reading the news on my computer, my heart beating a bit faster with a vague surprise, not schadenfreude, but astonishment. How did things end up like this? I wondered, memories of the trial 4 years ago flooding back. Her contemptuous smile, her threats to take everything. Now the wheel of justice had turned. But I didn't call her, didn't message. The past was closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. Maverick and Susan weren't spared the consequences either. From an old business contact, I heard that Kevin, Addison's brother, the young man who had sneered at me in court, had spiraled into indulgence, recklessness, and heavy losses in business. Kevin made risky stock investments, gambled, and engaged in shady deals, wiping out millions from the family fortune. Maverick, the old man once proud of his real estate empire, now watched his son destroy everything. To pay debts and clean up Kevin's mess, they were forced to sell off assets gradually. From the grand suburban villa to their prized investments, stocks, land, even the car collection. I thought of Maverick pointing mockingly at me in court, Susan blindly defending her daughter, and Kevin's sneer. Now they were paying the price. But I felt no joy. Only a fleeting sadness, because life teaches harsh lessons. I was once in that position, I thought, my heart quickening slightly at the memory. But I chose to rise differently. On a beautiful weekend day, I took Mom and the kids to visit Dad's grave. It was a peaceful cemetery in the Columbus suburbs, with rows of green trees and a breeze carrying the fresh scent of grass. We drove there, Emily held a bouquet of white daisies, Lucas a small toy car as if to show Grandpa. Mom walked beside us, her slender but steady figure holding incense. Before the simple headstone, engraved only with Dad's name and dates, we stood in silence. I watched Margaret standing quietly, the two children clinging to her. That serene scene made my heart ache. I had once thought I'd lost it forever. Family, hope. I slowly reflected on the journey. From a betrayed husband leaving court empty-handed, to standing strong again through patience and trust. I sat by Dad's grave, my mind swirling with images. Discovering Addison's affair, the fiery argument, the contempt from her parents, Mom's mysterious advice, and then the shocking announcement in court. I remembered the sleepless nights worrying about the future and how accepting total loss led to gaining manifold more. The greatest lesson wasn't about who won or lost in a failed marriage, but daring to stand for what was right, especially when it involved children and one's own dignity. I still clearly remembered the custody trial, Emily's trembling voice before the panel, and the moment I chose justice over letting hatred guide me. Back then, I reminded myself that revenge never brings true peace. Only clarity, integrity, and perseverance allow one to move forward without losing oneself. And that's the only way to protect those you love. Watching the kids hold Mom's hands before Dad's grave, I silently vowed to continue living honorably, raising them with love and discipline so the mistakes of the previous generation wouldn't repeat. Emily, Lucas, Dad will teach you to love, to forgive, but also to protect yourselves, I promised inwardly, my voice choking. For me, the greatest success wasn't money or status, but keeping a true family and a life without regret when looking back. I stood up, hugging Mom and the kids, the breeze carrying the scent of white daisies. On the drive home, the car glided smoothly on the highway. Emily dozed on Lucas's shoulder. Mom gazed out the window with a kind smile. I thought of Addison, now struggling alone after Evan left. I felt no hatred, only regret for her wrong choices. Life teaches lessons to everyone, I thought, my heart at peace. The house appeared, lights warmly glowing, and we stepped inside, dinner waiting, laughter ringing again. That was the end of the journey, but also a new beginning. I would live well, for Mom, for the kids, and for myself.